Do you know what ISO is good for? Hi all, hope you're doing well. In this video, we're gonna cover what ISO is, what it's good for, what it can be used for, and also some background on it. Let's go check it out. Alrighty, so ISO is an indicator of light sensitivity. It tells us exactly how much light the sensor or film in our camera can actually capture. So ISO helps us with our exposure settings, along with our shutter speed as well as aperture, and things can get a bit tricky, but we covered a video on it before, which you'll find in the description or right here. So let's take a deeper dive. The basic rule of thumb for ISO is simple. The higher the ISO, the brighter the photo is going to be. But there's also the factor of increased digital noise. Now that's why it may seem like a good idea to avoid noise in your pictures. But let's expand on that. Photographers are often so afraid to increase ISO because of the noise that they prefer to underexpose the photo and then try to fix that in post-production. Ironically, this is going to lead to noise finding its way back into the photo by increasing the exposure while editing. Now this is because even if we shoot in RAW, photo editing software cannot get additional image data information and creates new noise that was not there before. Now this can end up looking much worse than the noise that would have been in the photo if we just used a higher ISO setting. So, how do we choose the correct ISO setting? Well, there are several factors to consider. First and foremost, you got to know your camera. While ISO is a clearly defined value and should represent the exact same amount of light that each camera can handle, the noise that results is not so clearly defined at all. Newer cameras can capture photos with significantly less noise than older ones at higher ISOs. That's why we recommend trying several different ISO values for the exact same scene and then deciding later what level of noise is acceptable and what isn't, or seeing how much of the noise can be corrected in post-production. Now we'll talk more about reducing noise in this video, so don't go anywhere. The second factor to consider when you're choosing the right ISO is what sort of subject you're going to be photographing. Now, if you're shooting long exposures, keep the ISO setting as low as your camera allows. But if you're doing sports photography or something where you need the subjects to be frozen in time as best as possible, you're gonna need to compensate for the fast shutter speed. And when you're already at the lowest f-stop number that your subject will allow, you'll have to help by increasing the ISO level. That's why you're better off sacrificing a little bit of noise just for a better and sharper photograph in general. Now, the third factor is gonna be very closely related to the second factor, and that is that shooting mode matters. For example, if you're shooting in aperture priority mode, the ISO setting is going to be the main setting for how the camera chooses your shutter speed. Now, the ISO value you set is gonna affect your photo's motion blur, and this is why it's important to keep that in mind. Number 4, auto ISO. It can be too much of a good thing. Auto ISO is great, but other settings can make it go crazy high. And that's why it's a good idea to either pay attention to other camera settings or set a minimum and maximum ISO. And that's gonna be set ideally based on already tested noise levels. The fifth factor is gonna be a RAW versus JPEG, and this can greatly affect your digital noise as well. RAW photos are image data captured by the camera, including noise, and JPEG, on the other hand, sharpens photos and digitally removes noise as set by the camera's factory settings. So it's a good idea to take all of this into account and adjust your camera settings accordingly. RAW is easier to work with in post-production, of course, and reducing noise is much more effective than what you'd get with JPEG. But again, it's good to know your camera and its settings for both JPEG as well as RAW. Now we're almost done, but another factor you need to consider is reducing noise in post-production software. Reducing noise can help us when we have no choice but to push our ISO a lot higher than we'd like, and it's good to know the limits of noise removal. Unfortunately, it's not gonna save everything, and that's why it's bad to solely rely on it to get us out of trouble. So try finding a nice balance between ISO and reducing noise. Now, we already have a video of how to reduce noise in Sonora Photo Studio X. You'll find the link here and also in the description, so be sure to check that out. Now the last and final thing to consider is going to be something called native ISO. Now this really applies more to video, and especially if you're shooting in log format. In short, log is an ISO factory setting where you get the least possible noise in an image and can use it to shoot at relatively high ISO with virtually zero noise. The level of noise is not based on the ISO value, but rather the value added to the native ISO. Sony cameras and video cameras are a great example of this. They have what's called a dual native ISO for log. This means there are two values, the lowest being 640 all the way up to 12,800. At both values, noise is virtually non-existent, but when we increase the ISO from these values, noise level also increases. So that was a little sum about ISO and noise levels and their relationship between each other. Hope that was useful. Let us know what you think below, what subjects interest you, because we like to know and create videos off of that. Give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe bell, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, happy photography.